COVID-19 continues to have an immense impact on the world of film. Movie theatres have been forced into closure, film festivals have been cancelled, and the release of several blockbusters postponed. The film industry lost a reported $32 billion last year and faced over a 70% reduction in revenue, while in streaming there's been unprecedented growth in online video usage. In particular, there's been a tremendous surge in Netflix and Disney Plus subscriptions. But to give this video structure, I want us to look at blockbuster cinema generally, as that's where the big money usually is, before looking at Tenet, a film which has influenced distribution decisions moving forward. This video is formed of two parts, and I've done that intentionally as I think the context around Tenet is as interesting as the film itself. The first part of this video is my piece on last year, an investigation into some of the ways coronavirus has affected blockbuster cinema, while part 2 is a discussion of Chris Nolan, which includes a review of Tenet. So feel free to skip ahead to the review. As with all my content moving forward, there'll be time codes and chapter headings in the description. So delaying the release of movies became a trend at the start of the pandemic in March. Most recognisably, A Quiet Place Part 2 was postponed. The first film performed exceptionally on a small budget, and Paramount clearly anticipated similar results for the sequel. Director John Krasinski announced that he wanted the film to release theatrically so that everyone could see it together. At the time, there was so much uncertainty as to what was happening. By April, No Time to Die and Black Widow were also rescheduled. The problem at this point became more significant, as in any normal year these films would have topped the box office. Like Paramount, Eon and Marvel have elected to take a back seat for the time being. The problem for these studios is a financial one. Films like Bond and Black Widow are so expensive to produce, and they bank heavily on box office draw. This is despite efforts from Eon to distribute the new Bond film in a variety of ways for the princely sum of $600 million, a figure which they've refused to negotiate lessening. It's clear that Eon needs cinemas to reopen in order to generate takings similar to that of Spectre. There's a clear lack of confidence in allowing immediate home access to these movies, to which piracy plays an important role. It's common knowledge that these movies make so much money. Black Widow should make $1 billion. Consequently, the business plan for these major studios is one of releasing movies expected to profit less through online video outlets. This allows the studios to have a revenue stream while holding off on a larger payday for their more substantial investments. So while a lot of filmmakers are saying the shared experience of the movies is the most important reason for current postponements, for the studios it is all about money. It makes a lot of sense for them to wait until cinemas reopen and the rules around social distancing become relaxed. Although Warner Brothers have a different plan, they're allowing access to their future films through a new subscription service called HBO Max. The big question is, will consumers flock to another subscription-based service? It could be a complete failure. There's a likely outcome in which audiences are content with the status quo and find value in the offer of Netflix and Amazon over something new. It has competition. Netflix are aiming to release a new exclusive movie every week of this year. They're doubling down on quantity, boasting an extensive catalogue of new movies. Alternatively, Warner's banking on already established fan bases. To name a few, Space Jam 2, The Matrix 4 and Dune are a handful of films which have been eagerly anticipated for some time. They're movies that would do exceedingly well at the box office. One would hope they're of a higher quality than the clear quantity which Netflix is offering. This strategy from Warner suggests a shift towards releasing films at home and in cinemas at the same time. The first example of this was the Wonder Woman sequel last year, which I went to see at the cinema here in the UK, but in the US a substantial demographic watched it on HBO Max. We could be seeing a change in how we access movies, which I find to be an exciting prospect. I like the idea of choice. There are certainly some movies which benefit from being on the big screen, whereas for others I'm quite content with staying at home. However, I suspect this multi-distribution method is only a temporary solution which will span the length of the pandemic. Releasing in cinemas then months later on DVD is a tried and tested method, and it's less competitive in many respects. Another issue Warner face at the moment is one of confusion. They already have two on-demand services, and I suspect the average person will find the task of understanding the difference somewhat annoying. On top of that, champions of the cinematic experience such as Christopher Nolan are annoyed that movie distribution may undergo a change. Nolan, like Scorsese's, made his disapproval of Warner's methods loud and clear, and I admire his ethos. There is a difference between a cinematic and small screen experience. The preservation of cinema is of course important, but maybe a rethink in how we consume movies is also necessary. Filmmakers such as Nolan fear that remodeling film distribution will end in the death of cinema, but if I was being positive, my assumption is that audiences will be enthused by the idea of going to the cinema after being stuck inside for so long. The general consensus seems to be that people want to do things again, whether that's going to the pub or cinema visits. There's a definite pining for normality, which I hope the movie industry will capitalise on. For those that think movie theatres will remain closed forever, cinema is a survivor. It survived the Spanish flu a century ago, and it wasn't taken out by Netflix in recent years. If the cinema becomes a space for people who actually appreciate films, that's completely perfect for me. I suspect the types of people I usually scowl at for talking during a movie are the types of people that will opt to watch from home, where they can play on their phones and talk over the top of whatever they're watching. Crucially though, these choices made by Warner Brothers are linked to Tenet's poor performance. In hindsight, its release was a misstep. The filmmakers were obviously hopeful that audiences would risk attending a populated cinema mid-pandemic, although more importantly, it became a way for the film industry to understand current conditions. The release of Tenet answered a simple question: will people go to the cinema during a pandemic? The answer was yes, but not in substantial enough numbers. The harsh reality is Tenet didn't have to compete with anything, and it should have been a moneymaker for Warner Brothers, but in the middle of an epidemic, it took $360 million. A lot of money, but it wasn't the level of business Warner were clearly anticipating. The film cost $200 million to make, and that's not including the marketing budget. Studios like Disney, Paramount and Warner spend so much money on marketing. Box office pundits estimate it needed to make triple that figure to recoup its investment. If that's to be believed, then it's nowhere near breaking even. Digital and Blu-ray sales are obviously an important factor in a film's overall profit, so it's not completely doomed as of yet, but the reality of the scenario is that as a major movie with no competition, it stands to lose a lot of money. To put that $360 million in perspective, Interstellar took $693 and Inception $870 million, both of which were cheaper movies to make. Unfortunately, Tenet is Nolan's most expensive film, although it couldn't have come at a worse time. Tenet is now available to watch from the comfort of your own home. It's worth mentioning that you may actually get more out of it now with subtitles. I say that because the film has some major issues with its audio design. In what is a strikingly odd choice, the super intense soundtrack's been prioritised in the audio mix and it's layered over the dialogue. While this is a feature that's received a fair amount of criticism, Nolan seems pretty set in his ways. However, it's a problem in a film that's crammed with exposition. It's very easy to miss entire chunks of the film and become completely bewildered as a result of missing a line of dialogue. On top of that, Nolan seems obsessed with putting masks on all his characters, meaning you can't even read people's lips. A rethink in post-production could have gone a long way and resulted in a much more balanced sound mix. Contrary to what the Blu-ray menu might suggest, it's not that I'm hard of hearing, the movie is just inaudible at times. I fully understand Nolan wants his films to feel grandiose and epic. He aims to inspire and take the audience on a journey, but I think he might have gone one step too far with Tenet. If you enjoyed the film, I'm not here to take that away from you. It's a great feeling to be mesmerised by a Chris Nolan film. I remember loving Inception during high school. If I was that age watching Tenet, I'm sure it would inspire me in a similar way. But on the whole, I was quite disappointed by it. Annoyingly, it's a film which is impressive technically, but not everything about its story and characters work. If I've lost you already, as a bit of background, Tenet's the latest sci-fi action film from Christopher Nolan. It was highly anticipated by fans of his, myself included, and it looked to mimic the globe-trotting quality of the Bond films while being a unique science fiction story revolving around time manipulation. In the lead role, John David Washington stars as a Bond-like figure who's pulled into a mysterious organisation called Tenet after proving his allegiance to country. He's accompanied for the most part by Robert Pattinson, who has some information about the mission they're on, but it's all very enigmatic and they're intentionally being vague as to conceal their activities. The plot is exceptionally complicated, and if somebody explained the film to you in its entirety, it's likely they'd miss whole chunks of it. Importantly, within the world of the film, reversing time is possible. It's not quite time travel. The film clarifies early on that it's centering around time inversion. I'm not a science person remotely, but at one point a bullet is described as having reversed entropy. Some people will have a greater understanding of what that means than me, but it establishes that some objects have been inverted in the future and sent back to the present day. Similarly, we're led to understand early on that given the right equipment, certain characters can walk back through time and influence events in the past. And wrapping your head around that logic is the main source of enjoyment or displeasure to be had with it. I've actually viewed Tenet 6 or 7 times, the best of which was definitely in IMAX. Nolan, like several of his other films, has shot a handful of sequences with IMAX cameras. After being separated from the cinema for such a long time, it was the best way to reunite with it. IMAX is bigger and better. It's immersive in a way 3D never was. There's an art to 2D presentation, and IMAX takes that to its natural conclusion. Before I delve any further into a more conventional review, I'm going to talk about Nolan briefly. As far as my opinion of Christopher Nolan films, I'd say he certainly renewed my interest in cinema as a teenager, but of his films, Inception and Memento particularly captivated me. They're characteristically puzzling and benefit from multiple viewings. It's a great game unpacking his stories. His films are uniquely layered in a way that makes for fantastic conversation. Anyone interested in high concept filmmaking can get really swept away and enveloped by his premises. A lot of his films revolve around time. It's an idea that clearly fascinates him. Inception plays with time dilation while dreaming, Memento unfolds non-chronologically, and Dunkirk takes 3 timelines and links them at a specific point. And Tenet's a film which takes Nolan's interest in time perhaps the most seriously. It's about 10 days in total and a particular 10 minutes as it enters its final act. And as the title suggests, the film is a palindrome. It moves forwards and backwards, concluding at a central point, ending one story and beginning another. Nolan's always found interesting ways to structure his stories. He's comfortable with telling non-linear narratives, which are super enigmatic. Through doing this, he's cultivated a rather hardcore fan base, which uphold him as being one of the greatest modern directors of all time. Personally, I regard him very highly. He is a very talented filmmaker, and there was certainly a period in which I would consider him my favourite. He's been important in shaping my relationship with film, and I still think the industry needs more directors like Christopher Nolan, who have a prowess for these big projects. After discussing Tenet with friends, family, and watching it a bunch of times, I finally got a better grasp on it. I definitely didn't know what to make of it after first viewing. It's a film that has a lot of moving parts. There will be people that give up with it after 10 minutes, and there'll be people who claim to understand the whole thing who perhaps don't. It's a very difficult movie to follow, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I had to go on Reddit to understand many of its finer details, some of which I honestly still can't fully comprehend. I'm still not entirely sure how the start of the film links to the rest of it, which may sound odd, but when you've watched it, you'll know what I mean. It's a film that will make you feel stupid, particularly if you're into movies and you know what to expect from a Nolan film. But in my opinion, if you don't understand Tenet, that's actually fine, because in my heart of hearts, I didn't really like it. I'm sure the plot does all connect together in a satisfying way, but I think some character decisions are nonsensical or forced in order for the story to be cohesive. In fairness, I at least got what I thought I wanted. It's certainly a complicated movie, which you can spend hours discussing and reading about, but it has substantial character problems. I'll be discussing light spoilers about the nature of the story from this point of the video. The film's been out for a while now, so I don't feel all that bad. If you want the experience of watching it without knowing anything, definitely come back to this video when you've watched it and formed your own opinion. So the central premise is about a group in the future attempting to reverse the flow of time in order to prevent the effects of climate change. But to confuse this further, the villain played by Kenneth Branagh is omnicidal, and he isn't quite aligned with the people he's helping. His aim seems a little ridiculous. He wants to eradicate everyone from existence, and the film's justification of this is, if he can't live, then no one else should. That's the easiest part of the film to grab onto, and it's buried underneath a rapidly moving story. You're not given much time to think about the film's logic while you're watching it. I think it has a serious pacing issue. Watching it's like a test, and it's challenging you to keep up. Nolan loves complicated plotting, and to him that's what constitutes a cerebral film, although there are points at which questions of what and why prevent continued enjoyment. You really have to fight the film for a level of base coherence. After a while it becomes more frustrating than intriguing. Inception and Memento are much clearer films in comparison. Even if you don't fully understand what's happening in those movies, you can still follow along. It's deeply concerned with being a complex story to the point that you won't feel invested in the plight of the protagonist. I certainly felt a detachment from most of the film's main characters. Deciphering the code will keep you engaged mentally, but not emotionally, which for some people might be enough, but for me it wasn't. A common argument from Tenet supporters is that character isn't all that important in a film like Inception, so why should that matter here? Why the double standard, so to speak? Well, I admit character is secondary to plot in Inception. At its centre is the story of a man who's struggling to put the death of his wife behind him. The heart of the movie is Cobb trying to get back to his kids, and that's what gives the heist any stakes. In Tenet, you're meant to care about Kat's relationship with her son, but it's lessened by everything else around it. Oddly, I think the people in the future they're fighting against have more sympathetic motivations. The perceived villains attempting the time reversal have no option other than desperate measures. They arguably have better hindsight because they're in the future, and the protagonist only briefly empathizes with that logic. I can't help but think that Sator's behavior makes more sense than blindly following an enigmatic organization. There's a point in the movie in which the characters decide their collective ignorance of what's going on is the most effective way of being successful. The film really hopes that you don't think too hard about that and you're swept up in the action and spectacle. With regards to performances, Kenneth Branagh is terrible. In what is one of the hammiest performances of last year, it's borderline laughable, which is a problem when it wants you to take domestic abuse seriously. On top of that, he's doing a poor Russian accent, which only made it more unbearable for me. For a film that's meant to be inspired by the Bond legacy, a weak villain is a substantial issue. There's a scene in which Sator hits his wife. It's meant to be a very serious moment, which demonstrates his despicable nature, but it doesn't shock in the way that moment really needed to. It's meant to be emotionally stirring as the music ramps up in volume in an attempt to force emotion, but unfortunately the performance isn't there to support the score. I watched The Night Manager recently, which has Elizabeth Debicki playing an almost identical role. They're similar stories in a lot of ways. Tenet obviously has a sci-fi element, but they both revolve around espionage and preventing arms deals. Although Hugh Laurie plays a much more intimidating villain in The Night Manager. In many respects, I wish the cast from The Night Manager could have been imported into Tenet. In the lead role, John David Washington doesn't demand attention in the way Bale or DiCaprio's characters have in Nolan's previous films. Washington's an American football player with a bit of charisma, but I don't think he's a major acting talent. I enjoyed him in BlacKkKlansman, but I still think Adam Driver was essential in making that movie click. Saying that, in Tenet, there's a moment in which his character's fighting. There is a physicality to his performance. He does a fair amount of action in the film, but I wanted the story to lean into that. Nolan clearly wanted the character to have a swagger, but I don't think that was fully realised. Most importantly, Robert Pattinson is remarkable, and he's definitely the most interesting character. The cleverest Nolan moments certainly revolve around him. Whenever Pattinson was in the film, my enjoyment of it was much higher. It definitely feels like he's carrying the movie in the second half. Annoyingly, the relationship between Washington's character and Elizabeth Debicki's isn't all that endearing. Using The Night Manager as a reference point, it's obvious the script is at fault over the performance. Nolan doesn't write women very well. They generally just end up dying.
Look at me!
It is a film that's trying to be Bond-like, so I would argue that relationship wasn't meant to be platonic, and it working is definitely necessary for the film's logic. Particularly in the latter stages, it's definitely banking on there being a connection between the protagonist and Kat. He has a desire to defend her, which makes little sense when everything is weighed up. He gets from being a spy, willing to die for his country, to developing his own code of ethics rather rapidly, which can feel quite jarring. So underneath the complicated plot is a severe character issue. You can crash a plane and explode an unexploding building, but if I don't care about the characters, I'm just watching pretty images on a screen. Saying that, I value Nolan's dedication to practical effects and the way he's coordinated some of these sequences. There are some truly mind-bending moments in this film. There are actors performing backwards, images are reversed over footage that's playing out chronologically. It is spectacular. It's a masterclass in what can be achieved from blocking a scene in excruciating detail. When that's working, it can be complemented by Ludwig Göransson's sensational score. As I mentioned at the beginning of this review, the sound design is really annoying in the first half as they've prioritised the score over important dialogue, but in the action-heavy second half it works in unison with the image. Posterity is a brilliant track which carries with it so much intensity and urgency. But in conclusion, this film has a lot of excellent things in it. I just don't think it gels together in the way it aspired to. Even if I don't like it necessarily, no one but Nolan could have made this movie. Unlike Inception, it sometimes doesn't explain its logic in an accessible way, which is a problem when it expects you to accept and challenge the rules it's created. Overall, it makes other Nolan films seem lightweight by comparison. Maybe I'm not understanding Nolan's brilliance, and I'm sure I'll be shot down in the comment section. I just think Inception works better because it's about dreams, which as a story lends itself to the visual nature of movies. Tenet feels like reading a textbook more than doing a jigsaw, which might seem like a weird analogy, but the pieces of Tenet don't fit together in a satisfying way, but it wants you to be impressed by how detailed it is and how much work's gone into the story. I wasn't inspired by it in the way I have been with Nolan's other films. I didn't mention the Dark Knight trilogy in this video, but they're three of my favourite films which each excel at deconstructing a damaged and much more interesting character. Nolan can create exceptional characters, it's not the focus of his work, but he's always understood it. I was considering doing a whole video breaking down each individual section of the film, but then I realised I don't care about it that much. What's disappointing is that I really wanted to the point I've watched it 7 times, but I can't lie, I think it's mediocre at best. But I think that concludes the video for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about last year and the state of cinema at the moment. Remember to like and subscribe if you took anything from the video, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.